I want to thank you all for coming to my session, what development teams can learn from experienced designers. My name's Kimberly Blessing, and I work for a local company called Think Brownstone. When the program organizers reached out to me to give a talk, they said that they were looking for somebody to speak about design. And I'm not a designer, but I work for an experienced design firm, and so they thought maybe there were some tips and tricks that I could pass along to technologists based on my experience in working with an experienced design team. So that's what I'm here to do today. And as you've noticed, I've given out some markers and some note cards, so there will be a little bit of interactivity along with it. So you just hang tight on those, and we'll get to that stage in a little bit. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've been working in technology, in enterprise technology, for about 15 years. I've worked for AOL, PayPal, and for Comcast, and it seems no matter where I work, we always go through a logo redesign when I'm there. So if your company's thinking about it, you may want to hire Think Brownstone, because I do a lot of these. When we did the PayPal logo redesign, that was actually my first. That happened the first week that I was on the job at PayPal. My team was responsible for this. I was brought into a session to give an estimate as to how long it would take. I really didn't know the code base at that point, and I thought, well, gee, that should take 5 minutes, to actually do, and then to QA it. It shouldn't really take that long, except that there were about 10,000 instances of the logo throughout the site, different sizes, just the same file under different file names. It actually took a lot longer than I had expected. So let me just tell you a little bit about Think Brownstone, because we may be a new name to you. Think Brownstone, as I mentioned, is an experienced design research and design firm. We're based in Conshohocken, and we'll be opening an office in Philadelphia sometime this summer. I was brought on board just over a year ago to start the development team. Think Brownstone's been around since 2007 and had really just been focused on research and design. We started the development team, and we're now a team of 10. I'm happy to say that out of 10 people, 4 of us are women, so we're doing pretty well on that front. And I'll just mention that we're hiring in case anybody's looking. So that's us at the end of last year. That's Think Brownstone. And we're, I think, a pretty unique group of folks. Like I said, we were focused primarily on research and design. I came along to start development. And part of the reason that we wanted to, that the company wanted to really branch out into development had to do with what the company, as a group of experienced designers, was experiencing with their own clients. To tell you that story, I probably need to take a step back first and explain what experienced design is. I went to Wikipedia, as we now know or were reminded, it's a tertiary source, if you were at the keynote this morning. And so this definition is probably pretty standard, probably featured in a number of textbooks out there about experience design. And we, as primarily developers, I'm assuming mostly in the audience, probably look at this and words like service and quality and environment and solution, those are probably the words that stand out to us when we read about experience design. But if we look at this from the experience designer's perspective, there really are 2 key phrases in this, and they're the phrases user experience and culturally relevant. Those are really the most important things that experienced designers are thinking about when they're looking at a problem and trying to do their work. And so this is important because this is what happened from Think Brownstone's perspective. We would work with our clients from a design point of view. We would give them designs to address a product need. We would help them redesign a process. But when it came to actually implementing those changes, when they involved technology, oftentimes the solution fell short. Without actually having technologists, A, be part of the solution, and B, when the solution involved code and a client's team didn't have necessarily the skills or the capabilities to transform a design into the necessary code, the solutions were falling short. And so I think Brownstone kind of looked at its own internal process and said, how do we make this a better experience for our clients? How do we bridge that gap? And so that's really where the development team, the genesis of building a development team came from. Now, that said, I primarily come from tech companies. The experience design side for me is a little bit new. And so I'm kind of learning that side of the business as well. And as I'm doing that, I'm noticing patterns, as I guess technologists tend to. And that's really where I got the inspiration for this talk, was looking at what experienced designers do day in and day out, and how that can improve what developers and what development teams do in trying to get their work done. I've had a lot of conversations with Brian McIntyre, who is the Chief Design Officer at Think Brownstone, one of our co-founders. A lot of the images that you'll see in here are his notes, so I borrowed these from him. And Brian and I often talk about who a designer really is, because we went back and forth about whether or not we would continue the trend of giving everyone at Think Brownstone the title of designer. And finally, we decided, no, we probably should have developers. But in reality, we do feel that this is very true, that a designer is anyone who devises ways to change an existing situation into a preferred one. And this is not the exact quote by Herbert Simon. His exact statement is, the definition of design is everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. And he wrote that in 1969. And of course, Herbert Simon, we probably first think of him as a computer scientist, also a linguist, also into philosophy and organizational behavior, just sort of an all-around social scientist that we can learn so much from. But he really felt that designer could be an all-encompassing term. And so I really want everybody to kind of think about that for a moment. Because if we're all designers, let's say we're all designers in this room, what is it that experienced designers do differently? What is it that we can learn from them in order for us as technology designers, what can we do better? So the first thing that really stands out to me are how many questions experienced designers ask. You know, they're really not afraid to ask the stupid questions. And in fact, one of my other coworkers, Russ Stark, will often say, give yourself permission to ask the stupid questions. He's like, somebody needs to. And I agree with that. Too often, I think we make assumptions, we think we know something, and in reality, walking into a new situation, working on a new product, working with a new team, there are a whole host of questions that could be asked about that. I think on the technical side, one of the times that we are very much forced to ask questions, of course, is when something goes wrong. And I think we can sometimes stop short when going down that investigative process and trying to figure out what in fact went wrong. We oftentimes ask why, and we get to really a symptom of a larger problem, not to the root cause of a problem. So finding a bug in a piece of software and saying, well, how did this get there? And being able to point at the person who committed the code and say, well, gee, you know, why did you do this? And they say, well, you know, somebody told me so, told me to do that. If you stop there, all you know is that someone told somebody else to put a bug in the software. But you really need to keep asking why and to trace that path to figure out what overall took place. What is the root cause? What is the underlying symptom that has caused that event to transpire? Whitney Hess is a pretty well-known experienced designer. And she says, don't waste your time solving the wrong problem. So you really need to understand the underlying problem before trying to solve it. And that's basically, I think, what experienced designers are trying to do, and it's something that we as technologists can also remind ourselves of on a pretty frequent basis. I notice that experienced designers are always walking around with pen or marker and paper, and they're always doodling and sketching and taking notes. That's not why I gave you the note cards and the pens, by the way, but you're welcome to doodle and sketch and take notes. You don't have to be an artist in order to sit down and doodle and sketch. And I've noticed that just by working in an office where we have these things around, I do tend to pick up the pen and pick up the paper and just start drawing random things. In my case, coming from more of a mathematical background, I think I tend to draw very geometrical patterns and things that are, well, based on patterns, rather than odd things like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But that said, I find that just the act of writing and drawing as I'm listening to somebody else speak, or just as I'm ruminating over an idea, tends to help my brain kind of really engage, really kick in. And then sometimes what I do have at the end of the day are some pretty interesting notes that stand out in my mind when I mentally want to refer back to them. So it's something that is comfortable for some and not always for others, but it is something that you may want to try to do from time to time. One of the times when I see experienced designers doing a lot of doodling and sketching is during what we like to call think time. And I think this is just, having that non-meeting, non-coding, non-focus on deliverable time in your schedule, just to sit down and simply think. This is when you get to think about a problem at hand, play in your mind over some potential solutions, even sometimes just daydream a little bit and get some other thoughts into your brain so that you're refreshed when doing your work. I think Brownstone, the people that I work with, this is not a typical calendar. Obviously, this is just a little screenshot of what could be for some, and does actually happen, I know, in many companies. But what we tend to have are large blocks of time that are blocked off and actually labeled think time. And we really try to honor and respect that time on other people's calendars. If we're looking to schedule a meeting, whether it be for a client or just to sit down as a group and talk over some ideas, when somebody has that think time reserved on their calendar, we'll really try to do everything we can to make sure that that time is preserved for that person, because they've probably done some work and they know that that's when their brains are best engaged. Maybe you want to have the meeting after their think time if you're really trying to get them engaged in your particular topic. But this is something that you may want to try to experiment with if you find that you spend too much time running around in meetings and not getting to do the things that you really want to do. Put that think time on your calendar and try to preserve it. Now, that said, even though we try to preserve this think time, it doesn't mean that experienced designers work in isolation. In fact, they tend to collaborate on a very frequent basis. These are two of our developers, but in this case, they were actually also acting as experienced designers. This was at a recent hackathon that we held. When we have situations like this where people need to work together, what I've noticed about experienced designers is that they really dive in. They will get together and ensure that they are focused on understanding a client's business, a particular problem that they've approached us with. They want to make sure that they really understand the user's needs, and so they may even go off-site somewhere and immerse themselves in that particular business, into that type of scenario, so that they can truly experience things from the perspective of the customer. Now, in this case, we had two folks who were acting as designers, trying to come up with an evaluation of whether or not a particular piece of code was going to deliver what they thought was going to work best. When you're trying to do that, and in this case, this was one person's code with somebody else kind of peeking in and evaluating it, you really need to make sure that you have strong trust amongst the team so that you can have that deeper level of sharing and exchange. You have to trust that you all have the strengths and the skill sets to bring to the table to have that valuable exchange. Now, if you're going all that way and building trust, you're probably doing it a good bit by asking for and receiving feedback. But there's a really key word here, which is honest feedback. And that's oftentimes really difficult for an organization to uphold. Because honest feedback is really built on trust. Now, the experienced designers that I've worked with the introduction of a development team into the process, have been really great about reaching out to myself and the rest of the development team to make sure that what they're doing meets our expectations, and also to ensure that what we're doing is meeting their expectations. They've been very vocal, and they've really gone out of their way to engage us to ensure that everybody is happy with the outcomes, and that we're doing everything we can on both sides of the fence, so to speak, to ensure that we're delivering what we need to for our clients. Now, if giving somebody honest feedback makes you uncomfortable, that's okay. That's something else I've noticed with experienced designers. In this particular case, Mike Calabraro, one of our designers, had to get a little uncomfortable, not just by doing yoga one day, but also by wearing some pink pants in order to do that. And I appreciate him letting us photograph him doing that. But this is actually pretty typical. An experienced designer isn't always going to have the depth of knowledge about a particular business that they're working with a particular industry, or even with the problem at hand. So they really do have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Going back, like I said, and asking all of those questions, but being willing to go deep into something that they may not have a lot of knowledge of in order to become the expert and in order to be able to master the subject, so that we can do, as I said, that best work for our clients. And the thing about being uncomfortable and being vulnerable in these situations is that actually can transport you into the shoes of the person or of the people you're ultimately doing this work for. So if you're trying to build a product for a group of customers, and this is something that may be completely new to them, ensuring that you yourself are also new to this particular topic or some piece of it may actually help you make that empathetical leap, and may help you come up with those novel and ideal solutions that are necessary to bridge that gap. Experienced designers are really great at connecting the dots. So through all of these points that I've made so far, and especially through being uncomfortable and being new to something, they tend to realize connections where others haven't seen them before. And with that knowledge, they take that knowledge and they make sure that they're helping clients, developers, and customers also understand those connections. When you are able to go really deep like this into a process, you're able to shed light on things like redundancies, and you're also able to identify gaps. So one popular saying is that you want to pave the cow paths, but if you don't know where the cow paths are, how do you know where to pave? So this, stepping back and doing this type of analysis can really help with that. Experienced designers challenge assumptions all the time. And this might be one of the areas where we probably, developers and the experienced designers, butt heads most frequently. Experienced designers will come to the development team and say that they want to try something new. Our response may be, oh, the client doesn't want to do XYZ. They won't allow us to use that particular library. They haven't expressed an interest in making their website suitable for that type of device. We could have a whole host of assumptions that we've made. They may even, in some cases, be based on requirements that clients have given us. But the experienced designers are really willing to challenge that and, in essence, go back to the very first point that I made. They'll ask why over and over and over again to get to that root of the belief or the assumption. And that actually pushes us to come up with new and more creative solutions in some cases, and to even go back sometimes to our clients and advocate for changing their tech stack, changing the process that they're using. There are a whole host of possibilities that come into play when you do challenge those assumptions. I think the best thing about working for an experienced design company is that experienced designers really care about their environment. This is one of our workspaces, and we really love to bring our clients into our workspace because we have a lot of pride in it. And the pride is based in the fact that the space reflects who we are and what we need in order to do our best work. And so often our clients will want to come over even when we don't have meetings planned. And we invite them to do that because if they don't have a space where they can be open, where they can be in the light, have freedom of movement, and be able to engage and collaborate, that's a shame for their particular work environment, something that they may want to change. And this is oftentimes true of a lot of developer environments. Having separate offices or being stuck in a cubicle farm may not be ideal for the way you or your team really want to work. And so trying to change that into something that works for you is ideal. So like I said, you care about your environment and you take pride in it. And it's not always then just the space where you work, but also where you work. And I think that the development community, the technology community in Philadelphia has really had a great impact, as shown by the recent renaming of North 3rd Street to Nerd Street. When you have that pride in your environment, it's going to reflect in your work, and the work that you do is going to constantly and consistently be better because of it. So experienced designers understand what motivates people. Twitter says that they want to be a force for good, and that really speaks to designers and developers alike. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you building what you're building? And experienced designers believe that everyone is empowered to make things better. So experienced designers aren't really all that different from developers, are they? There might be a few reminders in here of things that you've perhaps forgotten to do or that your team has moved away from doing, but I bet that at the heart of it, developers want to do great work just like designers. They want to be creative. They want to question assumptions. They want to find new and novel solutions to problems. They want to make customers happy. So what's the difference between developers and experienced designers? I really feel like the biggest difference is just culture. Designers are told that they have to be creative, that they have to push boundaries, that they have to question assumptions, that they need to think outside the box. They're given many tools in order to express that creativity. They're given time and space. And so often when it comes to development and to engineering, we're told, fit that within this time box. Get it done this way. Just do it. We're not expected to put in the same kind of creative thought. We're not given the same freedom of expression that designers are given. So culture has a huge impact on what developers and designers do differently. So how do you build culture? How do you change culture? This blog post, "Don't Fuck Up the Culture," was written by the CEO of Airbnb. And I actually just read this yesterday. I'll admit to you that I actually rewrote my entire talk last night based on this blog post. Because what I was originally going to come in here and tell you was a whole bunch of information that was really, really great. The experienced design team at Think Brownstone sat down with me, gave me tons of input and resources and said, tell people to read this book and have them, try this experiment. But when I really sat down and read this particular blog post, it all hit home. The only difference really between experienced designers, it's not, what book they read. It's not about a particular process that they follow. It's really about the culture. So Brian Chesky writes, by upholding our core values in everything we do, culture is 1,000 things 1,000 times. It's living the core values when you hire, when you write an email, when you're working on a project, when you're walking in the hall. Later on, he writes, when the culture is strong, you can trust everyone to do the right thing. Now, when I started at Think Brownstone, like I said, just a little over a year ago, I was brought in to build the development team. There hadn't been one. And if the organization hadn't trusted me to do what I thought was right, I could have never done what I did. We wouldn't have a development team if somebody was there asking me constantly, when are you going to have somebody hired? What is the next step in building the business? Instead, I was given the freedom and the space to approach the problem the way I wanted to give my own recommendations. I was able to solicit input. And now we have the team that works well given what we do. Culture is all about the people. And experienced designers always put people first. When you put people first, you tend to think about what your values are. And when you have values that are that core to who you are as a person and how your team operates, you probably want to put it down on paper somewhere. These are Think Brownstone's core values. We have 6 of them. We try to put them on everything from our job postings to posters that people could have at their desk. But in reality, they're not that difficult to remember. And it serves as a great guide for not just what we look for, but who we are when we're interacting with one another and when we're interacting with our clients. I think the shortest reminder of this is probably one of my favorite and probably most geeky slides here, what I call the PowerPoint slide, the PPT slide. It's people first, then process, then technology. As developers, technology is probably the least interesting aspect of our jobs. Even though it's really cool and we love working with it, the people that we work with have to come first. The people that we're working for have to come first. And when I say the people we're working for, I don't mean the people who are signing our paychecks. I mean the people who are using the products that we're creating. They come first. How we get to that point is all about the process, how we work together. And if we have that working well, then figuring out the technology piece is generally pretty easy. But if you start with technology and expect process to solve itself and people to do well regardless, you're probably not going to be in as good of a solution in this situation. So I'm going to ask you to start just by thinking of something small that you could do today, tomorrow, Thursday when you get back to work. Just think of something small that you can do to start changing the culture where you work, to make it better for yourself and for the development teams that you work with. And so this is where the cards come into play, because hopefully, PowerPoint not being what we want to use for this, hopefully you have an inkling and an idea, even if it's just one word, put it down on the card, and I just want to read them off so that we can share some of these ideas for everybody else as to what you can go back and do in order to change the culture where you work. As many as you want. Volunteer. I love that. Volunteering is great. Have a Create Posters Day. Is that what it says? Create posters? Yeah. I love posters. Care more. Oh, this is my favorite one. I want to wear a t-shirt that says care more. Ask more questions and learn more. Excellent. I'm actually going to give them back because I want you to take them home with you. They're important. Set aside time for everyone to think up new ideas. Have a time to share the new ideas. I love that. Improve workspaces. Paint the walls. Oh, yes. Please. Paint. Greet at meetings. I love that.
I think so often people just get right into the business of the meeting without caring about showing some care about the other people around.
Yes, absolutely. I've walked into so many meetings, and I'm a consultant. I'll walk into a meeting where I don't know half the people in the room, and they'll just pretend like I'm not there. You know? Hi, I'm Kimberly. Oh, nice to meet you. I'm sorry, you are? Just a little bit of interaction. Protect crazy ideas. Oh, I love that. Protect the crazy ideas. I see sketch pads and think time. Everybody needs the think time. Acceptance of failure. I mean, how do we do what we do? How do developers ever learn how to become developers? We all started out writing Hello World and it didn't compile, and then you sat there until you got it right. Hello World being obviously a very simplistic, program, but you still started somewhere. Praise what supports culture. I love it. Interact, break down the silos. Very important. Try to put one another in, serve in each other's shoes. Visit more and concede to not having to win every argument. That's really important. Not every discussion is an argument, and not everybody has to win. Listen better. Please and thank you go a long way. Take ownership. Those are both really great. Hack time. Yes, I encourage every team to try their own hackathon. We learn so much. We have developers who haven't ever really worked together, and for us all to try to work on the same thing, we learned just so much about one another and our individual work styles. It was really amazing. Think user experience. I love that. I don't know whose or whose. I want you to keep them, and that way you'll be able to remember them later on. What else? Anybody else's that I haven't had a chance to read off? I think these are all really wonderful, and I hope that even if you didn't write one down, what somebody else said inspires you to go back and do something. Grace Hopper, another famous computer scientist. Hopefully we all know who she is, right? One of her very famous quotations, the most damaging phrase in the language is, "We've always done it this way." Well, if you want your culture to be great, you need to question that statement, and you need to look for better ways of doing things. Stop using "we've always done it this way" as an excuse. So what is your development team going to do differently? What are you going to do differently? We've heard some really great ideas. Hopefully what's been in this deck has presented you with some other ideas to go forward with. So I want to thank you so much for coming to my talk, and I hope that it's been helpful.
Any questions? Oh, we see a hand. One of the things you mentioned in your presentation was the fact that designers seem to get all the time in the world, and then they want the developers to turn it around in a matter of a week or so.
Yep.
Have you learned any techniques, any management type ways of overcoming that cultural type problem?
It's a tough problem, I think, I think back when we were in the waterfall world, where there was always sort of this idea of a hard deadline, where the project has to be done by this particular date. Design could keep pushing, and that always kind of limited the amount of time that development had. In the transition to more agile-based methodologies, there still is oftentimes this idea that there's this end date by which things need to be done. But if you truly have the teams working in a cross-disciplinary fashion, design shouldn't be off doing design somewhere else. They should be doing it side by side with the development team, which means that they should be the developers should be building prototypes of whatever the designers are designing, and they should be doing this side by side. So hopefully, they're thinking more about building, the minimum viable product and iterating on specific aspects of that product as they go through.
Would it be fair to restate what you just said?
We're going to get you the mic just so we get it all on tape.
The room's acoustics get eaten.
No,
Would it be fair to restate what you just said as meaning that if the designers get a lot of time and the developers don't, then you do not have an agile process and you need one?
That's exactly where I was going with that statement, yes. So, if you're not working in an agile world, and I'll admit that I'm not always the biggest proponent of agile methodologies for certain organizations, but if that's the case, if design is really getting to go off and do design on their own, and development then gets crunched, I think the question becomes, what time does the development organization have to focus on what it does? How do you address the technical debt that accrues when you've got that crunch time? How does the organization build its skill set, introduce new processes and tools? There still needs to be that type of pipeline that allows the development cycles to go faster. So somewhere the time needs to be allocated, and that's probably more an issue of educating probably the business stakeholders about the importance of the business running essentially on what the developers do, and that's still also needing to be a core focus in order to make a great end product. Okay, there's another question there.
I've seen various organizations do this very differently, so I'm curious as to how Think Brownstone does it. If you have developers and designers working side by side on prototypes all the time, and the designers take a long time, you have your developers spending most of their time aiding the designers, but you also need to get a lot of heavy back-end development done as well. So do you have two different development teams to do that? Or do you somehow schedule the time in an efficient way? How do you handle it?
No, that's a great question. So our development team is built to bridge the gap between where our designers typically end their work and where our clients' engineering teams are able to pick up the work. And so for us, that means we're actually flexing kind of where we end. So, if we're building like a, single-page JavaScript application, we're probably not working on building the data systems that are going to give us like, the JSON objects. We're just standing up, kind of temporary JSON objects that we're going to reference until we've got everything working the way we want from the user interface perspective, and then hooking it up to what our clients' engineering teams have been building on the back end. So there is quite a lot of collaboration there, and that's where our developers, if they're not prototyping, are probably serving as the interface between our designers and our clients' engineers to translate sort of what the needs are or what the requirements are or what kind of data is or isn't available, and to also kind of play that additional sort of consulting gap that existed before in making sure that designers are designing against what really can be done, and that the engineers are expecting what the designers may come up with.
Question?
Well, my slides will be available for download, and you can get in touch with me by email or Twitter or whatever other way is convenient. Thanks.
Thank you, Kimberly Blessing. Thank you.